So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Dominic Ridley-Moy, and I run the Behaviour Change Network, which is all about applying behavioural science techniques to drive better communications and campaigns. And today is all going to be about better data and evaluation. So how can better measurement transform your campaigns? How can it transform your communications? And how can it make it much more strategic and improve the impact that you have? So we've got some top experts in their field today to bring this all to life. But before I hand over to the presentations, just a few words around housekeeping, usual Teams etiquette. Please do ask questions as we go along in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll cover questions at the end once all of the speakers have finished. The event is being recorded, and we will share a recording with you. And if you're a member of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, it will be uploaded to their database so you can record any CPD points. So very excited today to have three speakers. So Russell Pask is going to be speaking in a bit. So he's from a data science and machine learning background, so that's his specialism. So really excited to hear what he's going to say. Also, John Paul Dannon from the agency Can, who I'm sure many of you work with already, who are specialists in running paid media campaigns from online advertising through to other channels like poster sites and everything offline. And then finally, I'm going to hand over in a second to, we'll just see, we've got the AI assistants joining as well. So your AI assistants are very welcome. And finally, I'm going to hand over to Lindsay Colson, who's going to kick off today. So she's an experienced communications consultant, if you don't know her, and she's held a number of senior roles as Director of Communications in a number of local authorities, also working with the Premier League, the NGO RAP, and she specialises in strategic communications, campaigns planning, and has a track record, as you would expect, of delivering award-winning campaigns. And I've learned loads from her over the years. And she's going to be talking a little bit about Oasis, which I'll let her explain, and how you can use that to help you with your planning. So I will share my screen magically now and hand over to Lindsay. Lindsay, you might need to unmute yourself.
Can you all hear me okay now? Yeah? Okay, right. Lots of thumbs up. Brilliant. Yeah, so thank you very much, Dominic. Always nice to hear kind words about yourself. Before we turn to Russell, though, what we just thought would be a good idea today is just to go through some of the theory and practice, kind of taking a step back and reminding everyone why knowing your audience is so important and how it fits into campaign planning overall. So many of you will be aware of Oasis, so apologies to those perhaps who do know and understand it well, but it is a commonly used planning framework in the public sector. I would say it's a very fluid framework if you're using it right. Each one is a stage of the process, starting with objective, and each stage defines the next, whilst also helping you to refine the stages before. So you're continually using this to kind of revise and improve your plan. So stage one, as you see there, is setting your objective, and that's where you agree the business imperative. And an example of that might be to recruit a number of foster carers. And you then set your smart communications objectives that will help the organisation to reach that goal. Stage two, which is what we're talking about in more detail today, is about understanding and segmenting your audiences, those audiences that you are trying to kind of inform and influence. Stage three is where you agree the strategy. And I think this is always the hardest bit for people to get their heads round. It's the way I like to think about it in the simplest terms it's the how and the why, rather than the what. And this is the part that kind of links your audience insight with your tactics. So you have a coordinated, intelligence-led approach that would include your key messages, your creative concept, your choice of channels, etc., all influenced by your audience and your insight. So it's hugely important, that stage. Implementation is the what. That's the easy part. And often I find the big mistake that people make is they jump from objective straight into implementation, and they haven't thought through their audience insight and their strategy. And implementation is where you draft your action plan. And finally, absolutely make sure you evaluate. By having smart objectives, it makes it much easier. You're looking at your outputs, your outcomes, and your impact, preferably using the government communications model, which is really great. Okay. So what we're looking at today, we're focusing on audience insight and how doing this can significantly improve your campaign planning. So, the more you can define and segment your audience groups, the easier it is to really understand them. So the kind of things that you want to know, it's all that stuff around kind of the socio-economic factors, their location, their job, their age. All of those factors are hugely important, but it's also, you really want to get under their skin and understand kind of, how do they live their lives, both offline and online? What places do they frequent, both offline and online? How do they think? What are their motivations, their biases, their understandings? And the more information that you can gather, it's easier to understand what barriers are standing in the way of them making changes, particularly if you are doing a campaign that is really heavy on behaviour change. So once you've got all of this information, you can create personas, and Russell will talk about this in a bit more detail. When you have those personas of your audience group where you're really drilling down the detail, this can help you to think how you're going to reach them with relevant content and messaging through the right channels. Okay. Do you want to move that on, Dominic? Thank you very much. So where do you get all of this information from? There is a lot of information already out there. A starting point really is what's been done previously. And there are some fantastic campaigns that have already been written and are out there. I mean, the chances are that another organisation will have done a similar campaign to you previously. So there is absolutely no point reinventing the wheel. Some of the good places that you can go to, Comms 2.0 have comms files, which I understand has over 1,000 different campaigns of really high quality that you can go and have a look at. But also the LGA and LG Comms are great places as well. So don't reinvent the wheel. There should also be a lot of organisational data in your organisation. So surveys, consultations that have been carried out in the past. What information can you pull out of those that will be helpful? And a service area will hold a lot of data, such as interactions with the service. So get into that and have a look at what you can find. Be curious about it. And I appreciate it's not an area where comms people always traditionally feel comfortable, but it is something I think it's worth getting your head round and starting to understand. And there will be people in your organisation who can help. And apologies there to the people who are actually really good at it, because I'm sure there are many comms people who are really good at it. It's something I've had to learn. But there are also lots of different places you can go to get information outside of the council. There's Mosaic and Acorn, which are paid for, but they will tell you the profiles of people who live in your area, and they're used a lot for marketing campaigns, usually when they're selling products. But they can be really useful, but they will cost money. But there is other information, census information and ward and borough information, which, whilst perhaps sometimes a bit broad, are free and can be extremely useful. And Russell will talk a bit more about some of the free tools you can access and how you can use them to help you. And don't forget about what you can also learn from people's activity online. What are people talking about online? You can find out a lot by listening to the chatter of social media. And likewise, what are people searching for online and how's that going to help you? So if you've done all of that and you've really sifted through, but perhaps you haven't got as much as you'd like, or you can't find the information that you need, I would say, and I think this is good practice anyway, go and talk to the people who, to your audience personas. Do a survey, organize focus groups. If there isn't any budget to do those things, then you can do that yourself. Get your comms team out with a clipboard, or yourself out with a clipboard. If you can just have those one-to-one conversations with people, that can really help. And you can find things out that perhaps you wouldn't have thought of. And likewise, it's really important to use those groups to test the later stages, your creative concept and your key messages, etc., to test those on your audience personas and see what resonates. Okay. Next slide, please. Dominic. Thank you. So just to summarise that very kind of quick run through of audience insight, and obviously there is a lot more to say, but in that short time, hopefully that's been helpful. Don't reinvent the wheel. There is a lot of information out there. Go and find that information within your organisation, because it will exist. But if there is a gap, be imaginative about it and go and talk to people. And finally, the better you know your target audience, the better your campaign will be. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was a really insightful, really useful introduction to audience insights. And I'm now, in a second, going to hand over to Russell Pask, who, as I said earlier, he's a data science and machine learning specialist. So really excited to hear what he's going to say. And I believe he's going to be talking about all things like prediction tools, datamation, audience personas, which I think basically means he knows a lot about how to use data to measure your communications, and importantly with some free tools. So I will hand over to Russell.
Thank you, Dominic. Could you move on the slide, please? So I think in terms of behaviour change and audience insight, the one thing I really want you to take away from today is that behaviour change must be customer focused. And if you're trying to do a behaviour change campaign and it's not customer focused, it's not really going to cut through. You've really got to get close to the person and find out what their behaviour is and what the possibilities and blockages are. You need to get really close to them. So I really emphasize this point, that behavior change is essentially about people, and you need to understand them, and this requires customer focus. Now, how do you get to the people and that level of customer focus? I think what you need to do is you need to go through 2 phases, and I think in terms of the OASIS framework, this is helpful in building your path to work out your strategy, to work out your campaign planning. So what you have to do is you have to audience segmentation is very important. You need to segment your audiences, and then within those audience segments, you need to find personas that exemplify the issues you're looking at. And I said, why? Well, why do we need to do this? Well, it's essential, as Lindsay said, with OASIS, each stage of the process feeds into the next ones. So if you don't understand your audiences well, you'll have difficulty in the later stages. The more insight and intelligence you have, the better the whole campaign will be, and also the evaluation. And I think it also, with the audience insight, it helps make things real. And I would also emphasize that if you get good intelligence on your audiences, then it creates the opportunity for creativity. In addition, I'm going to share some free stuff with you. And just on audience insight, fundamentally, you need it for campaign planning. How can you have a plan if you don't know who you need to speak to? This will deliver more actionable insights because you'll be able to understand the behavior changes required. You can also personalize measurement strategies. This is in terms of marketing effectiveness. Different audiences respond differently to marketing efforts. So you need to unpick which of those are going to work with the different groups. And finally, you need some way of evaluating all this. So it's important to understand your audiences, to build those into your OASIS model, to then measure them later on as well, which you need to do to test, learn, be agile, all those things. To move quickly, you need to understand your audiences. And as Lindsay said, there's a great deal of resources out there, and I would say they've got much better. And what's more is that they're free. And I would focus on 3 free resources. Census data. If you go to the census website, there is an immense amount of information about all your local populations. So that's a great source of just trying to quantify the problem. However you, with your objectives, you need to quantify the problem, and the census data will help you do that. Then there's the Ofcom data. Ofcom do some interesting surveys around communications, around media channels, around preferences. And so by using that information, you can build up a picture of what campaigns are perhaps likely to work with the different audiences. And then finally, there's the Consumer Data Research Centre, which has an audience segmentation, which I'll go on to talk about. And this is effectively a free version of what's on offer by Mosaic and Acorn. And it has mapping software, so you can look at your area, you can type in your local council, and it will bring up the whole area, and it will give you here it's showing supergroup classifications, which are all specified in the classification document, but it's got a great drill down effect. So you've got 8 supergroups, you've got 21 groups, you've got 52 subgroups. This is, again, really, really useful information, and I would strongly recommend looking at this. And so, as I said, audience insight is great, but you know, if you get things like I don't know, it'll tell you something like, you know, I don't know, work, you know, there might be an audience segment called hardworking families. Well, as a communicator, you're going to say, well, what does that mean? And I think what you then need to do is, again, drill down and look at individual cases of someone from hardworking families, and then you really want to make it personal, and this is how you build up a persona. And I'll give an example of a persona that was used in when I was working at Westco for a particular group who had a higher incidence of fire. So they were social renting, single adult household, and the classification itself was stretched society, and they had limited budgets. Now, you can get financial information about them, overall kinds of people that they are, what socials they use, what their media consumption is. But I think that, again, building up the persona is something like this. Mark is a 45-year-old divorced man, lives alone in social rented flat. He works as a courier and struggles to manage his limited budget, relying on government support to make ends meet. He has developed unhealthy habits, including heavy drinking, smoking, and occasional drug use. His smoking, particularly when combined with drinking, increases chances of forgetting to extinguish cigarettes properly, and the substance use makes him less cautious about potential hazards like leaving the stove on or overloading electrical outlets. Mark has few friends and has little spare budget to socialise outside of home. That's a real person. That's a real person that's been developed from the audience insight. And I think everyone understands this. And what this enables you to do as creative communicators is to go, right, here's an actual person. What are his blockages? What are the things that are his challenges? How do we communicate with this person? So, what I'm saying is you take the audience insight, you come down to the level of personas, and you build out a description of a character, and then that enables you to just communicate far better with the key people that exemplify your issues. Now, if Mark has, say, 4 or 5 blockers that you can change through behavior change, then 10% of the fires that happened in the last 10 years were due to people like Mark. So therefore, if you can remove the blockers, you can have a significant change on the incidence of fire. So personas humanize the data, turning data into people. They bridge the gap between business and customer need, and also they frame storytelling for board level impact. So again, when I was working at Westco, we did a bus consultation campaign for Cambridge and Peterborough, and this is a common problem. They didn't have much money and they didn't have any data, but they wanted us to do a significant consultation campaign, which was going to be difficult, and it was going to be hard to do. They required a load of survey responses to a website. And so we had to work out, well, let's not make this a campaign of everyone. Let's find out who the people are that are going to engage with this topic. So in order to do that, we used the. Could you move on, please, Tom? We used. So what we did, we didn't have any information. It's like an experiment, and I think you've got to understand this. When you ask a member of your research team or to look at these things, they're effectively conducting an experiment for you. So we put in some plausible assumptions. We said, well, let's look at how many people travel by bus. Let's look at areas of high deprivation. Let's look where there's more younger people. Let's look where there's more older people. Let's look where people don't have car ownership. And this enabled us to crystallize all the create hotspots all around the borough of Cambridgeshire in order to see where these people were, and also to give a kind of idea of the magnitude of the group. And from this we were able to build 12 personas useful to explain to the planning team and the communications team what these people were like. And this was also useful for pop-up events. The comms team knew where to put the pop-up events to engage people about raising awareness of the bus consultation campaign, because we knew where people were using buses. We also were able to use the Ofcom data to understand what media consumption all those people were having. So there was marketing effectiveness in terms of reaching these people. And in addition, because all the audience insight is focused on postcodes, we were actually able to identify these people, and we could actually go and speak to them. So we went from personas to people. We were actually able to speak to the people about these issues. And I would again emphasize that in any behavior change campaign, this is exactly what you need to do. And you'll find how much they rehearse things that you've already identified in the personas, but also they'll have possible service redesign for you, all kinds of possible insights that you can draw from these people, and you don't need to speak to that many of them. And again, it's incredibly insightful. And again, a project I did for Westco, I'm using the, because we can't name the client, I'm using the title Wessexshire Fire Safety Campaign to fill in, as it was a kind of somewhere in the home counties, and I want to apply the OASIS framework to that. So it's a fire safety campaign. So the simplest objective, and the one to prioritize, is we want to see a fall in domestic fires. A very simple objective. Now, so there were kind of two things that came out of this. One was what the audience insight showed us. So we were able to see the domestic fires by postcode, and what this told us was that the incidence of domestic fires varied massively by the different audience segments, and therefore then it's like, oh, I see. So that then I pass this over to the comms team, and then they can develop a strategy and implement highly targeted behavior campaigns. And then also this has an effect on the scoring, on the evaluation, because the evaluation is simply, well, can you reduce the number of domestic fires? So could you move on, please? So we had the situation where we could look at the data and say, right, we need to reduce the level of fires. And again, we know the risks of these different groups are very varied. There's a 1 in 250 chance of a household having a fire, but some groups the level is halved. Groups, identified in the ACORN segments as stable, senior, and traditional householder. However, there were other groups where the chance was 1 in 400. They had 3 times the chance of fire. Now, again, if you can go in knowing this kind of information, you're actually providing service information to the client. And I think this is another important thing, that you're basically providing service product information back to the service team if you're doing your job right. And also that you want to gain that research as well from the service team. They will have some of this data. And again, with predicting, so what I was able to do, these dots on this graph basically show an imaginary level of fire incidents, and through the years from 2015 to 2025. And it's, as you can see, it's a kind of a sinuous curve heading downwards. And this is because there's seasonal variation in fire. And as you can see, the dots run out in 2024-25. And that's because at that point we didn't have the data. And so what I was able to do was, using predictive AI, was to basically draw in the line and then work out how many fires there would be most likely in Wessexshire during that time. And the thing with that is that enables you, that's your baseline, because if the number of fires is falling anyway. So how do you know whether your campaign is successful? Well, you've got to beat the baseline. You've got to be below the baseline. You've got to be below that score. Whereas if you weren't doing the evaluation properly, you'd see, maybe you did your campaign and the number of domestic fires fell. Well, you'd think that was a success, but it might not be, because as you can see, the overall trend is downward. So again, this is exactly the point about this arises from looking at all the data, looking at your audiences, and clearly evaluating the content.
Thank you, Russell. That's really, really useful. And I've got so many questions already thinking about all the kind of use cases for that. So kind of so many things in terms of like, as you said, around fire, whether it's public health, recycling, climate change. There's so many areas where it can make such a difference. So we'll pick that up in the questions. So if you've got any specific questions, do drop them in the Q&A, do drop them in the chat. Anything that sparked, oh, that sounds really exciting. How can I do that? How can I do that in my own organisation? If you're thinking there's things that we can do, but you're not quite sure where to start, anything like that, how you use personas, do drop those questions into the chat as we go along. And really exciting now to have, so John Paul is going to finish off and bring this to life even more. So John Paul Daniels from the agency Can, who are specialists, as I was saying earlier, in running paid media campaigns from online advertising through to offline, and I believe he's going to be talking about segmentation from much more of a digital perspective. So over to you, John Paul.
Thank you, Dominic, for having me along. Brilliant presentation, Russell. I mean, there's so many good resources in there. I wanted to talk a little bit from our point of experience at Can. We help lots of public sector organisations run the paid media side of their campaigns. I'm just going to quickly touch on the performance mindset, the platform targeting capabilities, and tying that in with personas. Looking at the new capability of always on evaluation, and then talking a bit about optimization, i.e. transforming campaigns once they're up and running. Can, if you don't know us, we've run over 3,000 campaigns now for people, and we are hyper focused on accelerating savings for various directorates, adults, children's, health, waste, and so on. And what we look at is reducing cost per outcome. And there is so much opportunity to do this with public sector campaigns. And what reducing cost per outcome does is basically means you get more outcomes for your budget. We have these basic emerging communication principles for public sector campaigns. Everything you do must be inclusive. You've got to reach as much of the target audience as you can. You need a mixture of in-person, human, physical, and then digital, amplifying and doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And very much in the same way that personas make data real, telling stories is what really connects with people. We must make sure that what we're doing is about saving money, reducing cost per outcome, connecting campaigns, and so on. But our third principle, which arguably could be our first, is that if you've got no data, we shouldn't really do anything. If you don't know if we've reached the audience, if we don't know how many outcomes we generate, if we don't know what we're saving, you're kind of rudderless, and data is absolutely essential to be able to do a good job. And I want to show you what we've learned from running all of these campaigns over the next few slides. So I think Lindsay and Russell were certainly talking about what you can do at that insight stage and really pull together to understand what's going on. We're often at the pay level dealing with a situation where things are already moving, and it reminded me a little bit of that analogy about jumping off a cliff and then building the plane on the way down. And with modern technology, with programmatic, with data, that's very possible, and actually it's an incredibly efficient way of doing things. And if you think honestly about the number of times you're given the time and the space to really do insight and research properly, often things are rolling, and you do need, as comms professionals, to build the plane on the way down. And I want to reassure you that that is possible with some of these techniques. I think it's really important for communications professionals to familiarise yourself with the Georgia Turner framework, which addresses a problem we hear about all the time, about people getting in touch with communications professionals asking for a video, a press release, a social media post, some leaflets printing, tactical requests. And then the framework encourages us to use questions that move that conversation back to strategic conversations. What do we need to see in 3 months, in 6 months, and 9 months for this to be successful? What happens if we do nothing? How will we know this has worked? And that moves us into a place where we're talking about the metrics and the data sets that we're going to need to be able to see to do our job. So I thought I'd bring Georgia Turner framework up, because in the real world you get asked for tactical things and we need to move things back to strategic things. And what it helps communication professionals hopefully do is move away from the publisher mindset, pushing content out there, press releases, organic social, which are important and are part of it, into the performance mindset. So is what we're doing generating the desired outcome? And what you really want to be seeing when you work with, internally or with an agency or something like that, is this graph. We start off with lots of interactions, and over time we get more efficient at driving the orange line, which is outcomes. If you don't have that graph, you can't do this. You can't transform the campaign if you don't know what to tweak. And so it's really, really important that you plan your campaign to generate evaluation data in real time, because there are so many massive wins that can be had, or so many outcomes that can be accelerated by taking this approach. And I'm referring again to that campaign that we all got to work on together, Russell, Lindsay, Dominic and I, on the bus consultation. We designed it to be measurable, so we could see what was happening when, and then critically measure some of the more offline tactics that were going on, direct mail and so on, to be able to then influence and optimize our channel choice over time. We're finding that paid digital was generating a cost per interaction of about 30 pence. And some of the other channels were well above 200, 300 pounds. And I think this is one of the most valuable things you can do during a campaign, is to maybe slow down some of the things that have been requested but are very expensive, and shift spend towards the things that are actually working. And I use this device to sort of convince someone, to bring someone round to this sort of idea. Data doesn't tend to win hearts and minds. And I ask people sometimes to say, well, look, if I rung you up and said that I would reduce your energy bill by a factor of 2.7, so 100 quid down to 35, you'd probably switch tomorrow. If I said I'd reduce it by a factor of 27, you'd probably switch and then tell your family and maybe some of your friends about it. That difference in performance was 277 times more effective. And so during the campaign, we need to switch and we need to optimize. Another way of putting it, to the elected member who's adamant that they want to buy TV, radio, something like that, is imagine turning your 45-minute commute home into a 9-second beaming onto your sofa. That's the difference in performance. And I think advising people using data to make good channel choices enables us to move away from campaigns that feature a lot of paid channels that maybe don't work, towards stuff that actually does work. And I believe this is one of the most important transformations we can do just before, during campaigns. And that unfortunately leads us to some, advice that the data is showing us that because of various reasons, cost per outcome, the alternatives of audiences, there are channels that you tend to recommend less and less frequently. And it's really important that we understand these things and we know how to make the case for explaining that, which is where that data is so useful. So reducing waste, improving performance, this is how we can do things. I'm not, by the way, no one is against these channels per se. It's just that if you have to pay for them, outcomes go down. However, if they're free and as part of your estate as a council, brilliant, use them. It's fantastic. What we did see was that direct mail was really the only thing that really moved the dial, and so using really targeted direct mail to augment digital amplification is certainly to be recommended. So what you end up is a sort of basic public sector amplification mix, which is your own channels, your own out-of-home, web, email, and so on, targeted direct mail, the Google infrastructure, which is YouTube, ads on news sites, search, but also the Meta infrastructure, Facebook and Instagram, and for younger audiences, Snapchat. This isn't the world, but it is certainly the vast majority of what will work and work most effectively when you're running campaigns. And this insight is derived from running many hundreds of campaigns and making suboptimal decisions. So when you have those platforms, it's then really important to understand the targeting capabilities of those platforms. And so when you've developed personas and you understand where the service data is pointing you, it's really important to understand, okay, well, what can I translate from those personas onto buying instructions for those various platforms? So familiarizing yourself with that is really important, because how you set up those instructions, those programs, will obviously ensure that you reach people, but also then maximize performance and reduce waste. I don't want to teach any of you to suck it. I'm sure you're all aware of the marketing funnel, but this is where those channels kind of sit on that marketing funnel. And it's really important to understand what's going to do what and where. So search and remarketing are really strong at finding people who are almost there, who are interested and just need bringing over the edge. The owned estate, direct mail, and some of the other display platforms are much more higher up the funnel at the awareness phase. But then we've got bringing people to conversion, and a huge problem with conversion are, should we say, suboptimally designed landing pages. And it's absolutely critical that we do not compromise on this final step, because you can get everything else right, the personas, the insight, the buying, have everything set up, and then land everybody on a really clunky, too much information, doesn't work particularly well on mobile landing page. And so it's very important that you factor this into ensuring that your campaign maximizes outcomes. It also means that you can plug in all the technology you need to drive performance. Saying that, it is also really worth looking at in-platform on social media interaction and user experiences, because we find we can increase responses by a factor of 5 at times. By having all of that in place, it means then you can measure the impact of the campaign in real time and see what channels are driving what outcomes, and then cut the channels that aren't and start investing more of the budget in the channels that do deliver an outcome. And that leads you to be able to then optimize over time. So just to refresh, I think it's really important to look at the plumbing list. And these are things which we should be pulling together and not really negotiating on when we're running campaigns. So you need service data before, during, and after, a feed of outcomes happening by date, and also taking account of potential offline routes, feeding in so that then we can map that, we can establish a baseline and then map communications activity against increases or decreases in other outcomes. Without that, you can't evaluate. So it's well worth having that in place so you know what the problem is and how to fix it. It's also really important in the digital world that you have pixels installed for remarketing, i.e. people that land and then bounce, and then conversion. So which tactics, which messages generated that outcome. And sometimes with some platforms, there's the option to do server integration as well, which is really, really powerful in terms of using machine learning to accelerate performance. You also need to think about offline media, using QR codes with ad trackers built in, getting services to feed back data on quality and outcomes. And then, of course, you need the platform data. So interactions by date, conversions reported by date, cost per conversion, and you need to feed all of that data into some sort of reporting platform. We use Looker, but there's Power BI and others. And that plumbing is really integral, because if you don't have that, you can't make the decisions afterwards. And so I would say, if you take away one thing from what I'm sharing with you today, have that list and build it into everything that you do. And that will mean that over time, by a mixture of machine learning and human pruning, we can dramatically accelerate the move away from stuff that doesn't work or doesn't have an impact to stuff that does, and increase the number of increase the number of outcomes you get for your budget. So, for example, in fostering, we can demonstrate that every pound you give a communications team saves children's services £19. And that's what I think communications professionals need to be talking about to services to sustain investment. So that's quite a lot to do. And I think it's really important to just be realistic about, with our busy calendars, are we going to be able to get the service data, get the plumbing in place, have the discussions about pixels, get all the platform access in place, get that all live, collate that data, plug it into something that then helps you evaluate, and then to consistently optimize it at least once per week, so that then you can show to the services that the cost per outcome is reducing. That is the performance mindset, and it is not to be underestimated how much work it takes. And so maybe this is something that happens when there's proper budget, there's proper investment, and it's a proper priority for the organization. So it's a really strong argument for having key strategic priorities within the comms team. So just to balance that off and to reiterate some of the points, it might look impossible. It's not. It happens, and we're making it easier for people to do in lots of different situations. But as Lindsay suggested, borrow from each other. Tap Can up for free search insight to understand what's on people's minds. Use organizations like Orlo for insight into what people are thinking about in your area. Use your existing comms estate, your digital and physical estate, for free to test and learn and to amplify and to build audience. Use that Georgia Turner framework to diffuse maybe suboptimal requests and move people to strategic outcomes conversations, and collaborate with each other, crossover on campaigns, and collaborate with wonderful trusted public sector partners like Dominic, like Lindsay, like Russell, to make these things happen, because there aren't enough resources, and that's why it's almost more important when working in public sector communications that we do this brilliantly together. That's it from me. Any questions?
Thank you so much, John Paul. That was really, really insightful. So many useful tips and advice, and we're going to touch on a few of those now. So if you've got any more questions, do drop them in the chat or the Q&A, and we will cover those up. We've got about 10 minutes for questions now, and I'll send around the details of all the speakers, because all of them are such a treasure trove of useful information and expertise, and can really help you with the work that you're doing. So we are going to kick off with, I think we're going to have to let Russell back in. So I think Russell must have had problems and dropped off. So I'm just going to ask my colleague Danielle to make sure that Russell can speak. Are you back, Russell?
Yeah. I had an internet problem. Sorry. So
it's always the way, isn't it, when you're slightly
sorry.
We're going to kick off with a really good question from Isabella, which is: do AI chat tools like ChatGPT have access to census data and mosaic data, and can they be used to help create persona profiles? So I think I'm going to go straight to Russell for that one.
Excellent question, and the answer is yes. So I mean, I would say that in as much that AI is affecting marketing, it's doubly so in the area of research, and certainly if you put, if you fed it the audience segmentation document, so added that in, and then told the AI agent about your specification, yes, it could do this, and it could generate personas for you.
Okay, that's great, thank you. And I'm gonna so another good question in the chat, which is, how did you speak to bus users whilst you'd identify the audiences to reach the numbers you did? So I think I'm going to go to Lindsay for that one. You can unmute
Sure,
yourself,
thank you.
Lindsay.
Well, we used a multi-channel approach. So this was a bus franchising consultation. It was very big and complex. We wanted representation from the whole of the region, but we also really needed to ensure that we were speaking to people from across protected characteristics, but also people who used the bus. So we used those personas largely for the events that we held. We organised focus groups specifically with people from protected characteristics who would have an interest in using the bus both now and in the future. It was mainly events. We also did a lot of kind of just turn up and leaflet and chat to people across the whole of the region, and those we held quite a lot of those sort of bus areas, high levels of bus use, but we also arranged and organised some of them in areas where we knew our personas would frequent. And then it's probably worth JP just talking about what we did online, because he focused on that.
Yeah, sorry, I just put my hand up.
Yeah.
Absolutely. One of the brilliant assets that they had was the bus information website. And what we're able to do is to put remarketing pixels on that site, and then place ads for the consultation in front of people who were looking at bus information. And that turned out to be the most effective prospecting and targeting attribute. And we spent a very little amount of money on it. So this is one of those things where your estate in the public sector is incredibly valuable versus using third-party data.
Russell, did you want to come in as well?
Yeah, I'd also like to say, again, part of the kind of falling off the cliff and building the plane as you go, I think it's incredibly important that you're able to provide the digital campaign team with service level data. So we were able to feed to JP the information about the responses we were getting very, very quickly. And I think that this is, I just cannot emphasize this enough. You need to make sure the service team are ready to pass the data that is required by the digital campaign team, so they can reiterate, they can learn, and so they can do the agile movements and recalibrate as necessary.
Great, thank you. We've got another question, and I think we'll have time just to wrap up. So I think this is probably one for John Paul. So from Marcus, the question is look at a safe place for data regarding GDPR.
Hello, Marcus. It is safe for aggregated data. So most of the information, all of the information that we put into dashboards is aggregated data. There's no personally identifiable information in there. Looker Studio could potentially be dangerous if you were feeding form responses, for example, into it, which you definitely don't want to do. So it is a publishing and visualization tool. If you don't put personally identifiable information in there, you're in a very safe space when it comes to data protection.
Excellent, thank you. All right, well, we're gonna ask everyone to kind of have one final thought, which is kind of from each of the speakers, just really a bit about something that I think Lindsay touched on, about kind of if there's any final thoughts, I suppose potentially whether it's mistakes that people make with their campaigns or kind of tips and advice. What kind of thing would you ask people to take away from today? Any sort of final thoughts about where to go next? So I think I've lost the speakers. Did you want to go first, Lindsay?
Yeah, very happy to. So I think going back to what I said in my slides, really, make sure you use a planning framework. It doesn't have to be Oasis if you're using a framework, as long as it includes audience and strategy and doesn't just jump straight from objective into tactics. Spend some time thinking through what you're actually going to do and how you're going to do it. And that time spent on drafting a really good campaign and also working with the service to do it. Don't do it in isolation as a communications team. Do it across the whole of the council. Get backing from everybody, and it will stand you in good stead, and it'll be much easier to deliver a really fantastic campaign that's going to be focused and get the results for you.
Thank you. And just quickly, I'm going to go to John Paul and then Russell finally. So John Paul, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning that sometimes if you don't have data, you don't have evaluation, there's this feeling in the bottom of your stomach that what you've done isn't as good as it could have been, and you just don't know. And actually embracing data means that throughout the campaign, you can see it working. And that is really, really enjoyable. The data plumbing and the data metric side of things is sort of stuff you need to do, but it is so satisfying and so enjoyable to see those outcomes happening and to learn. It is very rewarding and makes the job, really, really good fun.
Okay, I can see lots of geeky comms people getting excited about that. I know I do, but I'm gonna hold myself back. Russell, any final thoughts from yourself?
Well, I would say the connection with, if you're in communications, I think that it gives a focus to the service team in a way that they perhaps haven't had in terms of crystallizing their ideas. And I think it's a great opportunity to provide the service team with data, reflect on their data, and to provide them with perhaps things they don't know. It's going to make you look good if you can show them something about their data that they don't know. It's going to make them think more of comms. And the example I would give is the case of the domestic fires, was that in terms of baselining, that they weren't so interested in, we're baselining on this number of fires. They were interested in the question, you can predict our fire. That was the thing that captured their imagination. Not that we were trying to baseline to a level to show that our campaign was effective.
Yeah, and I think that's such a powerful point, to demonstrate the value of communications, to demonstrate how comms can shift outcomes and can make a difference and can actually kind of move those kind of business, those organizational goals. And it's not just fluffy comms, it makes such an important contribution. So I think that's really the learning from today, all the things that you can do, so things that you can do in your own organizations. I'll send around the details, as I said, for the speakers, so do get in touch with them, do use them. More webinars coming up, so do sign up for my email newsletter if you haven't already. As I said earlier, we'll send around the recording, send around the links to all the really useful resources, particularly the free ones that everyone was talking about. And if you're a member of CIPR, do log CPD points when you get a chance to. And thank you very much. Enjoy the sunny afternoon if you get a chance to, and enjoy your weekends, and see you soon at another webinar. Take care. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.